I gave that company 17 years. Trained their teams, built their systems, stayed loyal even when they didn't deserve it. Then one morning they fired me without a word of warning. They thought I'd walk away quietly. But I don't break, I build. And this time I built a plan they'd never see coming. Clara, after 16 years, your position is being eliminated. Please pack up your things by end of day. That was all Daniel, my boss, had to say. No warning, no thanks, not even eye contact. Just a final sentence to end my career at Orion Systems. My name is Clara Bennett, 51 years old. And until that Monday morning, I was the lead systems analyst at Orion's Boston headquarters. For over a decade and a half, I'd been the steady pulse behind the IT infrastructure, solving crashes, upgrading servers, and patching security holes while others took credit and climbed ladders. I wasn't flashy. I wasn't political. But I was indispensable. At least I thought I was. The HR director, Vanessa, sat beside Daniel during the meeting. Her presence said everything. The severance packet was already on the desk. I understand, I said calmly, taking the envelope without another word. I knew what had been happening behind the scenes for weeks. Quiet whispers, exclusion from key meetings, gradual changes in system access. I may have been out of the loop, but I wasn't blind. Back at my desk, the younger employees avoided eye contact. Some I had mentored. A few I'd even defended during layoffs. One of them, Zoe, peeked over her monitor. Her lips parted like she wanted to say something, but then she looked down. It was fine. I didn't need a scene. I just needed my cactus, my mug from the company picnic 5 years ago, and the framed photo of my daughter, Ellie, taken when she started college. Everything else could burn. As I walked out, I felt Daniel's eyes on my back. No handshake. No farewell. Just surveillance. Watching to make sure I left. He didn't know that I'd seen this coming. 6 months ago, when they started bringing in consultants with buzzwords like streamline and cost optimization, I began quietly saving copies of system blueprints, login logs, and compliance checklists. All things I'd created, maintained, and audited without fail. What they also didn't realize was that I'd set up a full internal audit trail years ago. After the last data breach scare, I'd built tracking tools approved by legal that logged every administrative access request and change across our financial and HR servers. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was just disappointed. 16 years, and I was pushed aside without so much as a conversation. But this wasn't over. At home, my husband Dean opened the door before I could get my key in. He looked at me, then at the box in my arms. "They let you go," he said softly. I nodded and set the box down. "Want me to make coffee?" "Yeah," I said. "Make it strong." I stood at the kitchen window watching the snow melt in the early March sun. The icicles dripping from the roof looked like slow-moving daggers. I felt hollow inside, but beneath that hollowness, something else stirred. Something colder. More focused. I walked to my home office, opened the bottom drawer, and pulled out a secure flash drive. Inside were all the files I'd copied. Records that could prove things weren't quite right with Orion's leadership. There was a time to be silent and loyal. But that time was over. If Daniel and the executives thought I'd just disappear quietly, they were about to learn who they'd underestimated. Over the next few days, I let the silence of my apartment settle over me like dust. I didn't jump to send angry emails or start applying for jobs I didn't want. Instead, I opened the bottom drawer of my desk and pulled out a small black notebook, my personal audit log. Not just passwords or projects, but notes I'd kept for years. Quiet observations. Anomalies. Things I wasn't supposed to know. I'd always had a hunch something shady was going on in upper management. Missing invoice numbers, duplicate software contracts, approvals that bypassed the normal chain. But like any good systems manager, I made copies and kept receipts. I wasn't planning to be a whistleblower. I was planning to retire in 5 years. But they made that choice for me. On Wednesday, the same day of Meridian's quarterly board meeting, I dressed in jeans and a worn college sweatshirt and drove to my favorite coffee shop downtown. My laptop rested on the table in front of me like an old friend. I wasn't ready for revenge. I was ready for clarity. I logged into a secure backup system I'd built on my own years ago. After the legal department requested off-site recovery protocols during an internal audit, no one remembered it existed. What I found was worse than I expected. The financial records showed a vendor named Northbridge Analytics, supposedly providing infrastructure consulting. But I'd never approved their access. Their invoices were too neat, too consistent, almost like someone had templated them. And the payments? Nearly $2.7 million over 2 years. The approval path ran directly through the CFO and a name I hadn't seen in years. Mia Duval. Mia used to be my intern, then transferred to finance. She was smart but always looked for shortcuts. I'd warned HR about her behavior years ago, but they'd swept it under the rug. Now she was the CEO's executive assistant. I felt a familiar tension behind my ribs, fear mixed with purpose. I started cross-referencing public records. Northbridge Analytics was registered to a P.O. box in Maryland. The listed owner? Mia's brother. A software engineer with no prior consulting experience. It wasn't just favoritism, it was fraud. By the time I finished compiling the initial report, it was almost midnight. I sat back and let my fingers go still over the keys. Then I opened a new browser tab and typed in the private email address of Clara Wu, a board member who had once led Meridian's compliance division. We'd worked together on a legacy security upgrade 5 years ago. I remembered her integrity, her questions, her fairness. Subject line: Meridian payment discrepancies. For your eyes only. I attached a summary of the Northbridge Analytics findings. Names, amounts, dates. I didn't add commentary. I didn't need to. The facts spoke for themselves. As I clicked send, I realized this wasn't about getting my job back. This was about making sure they couldn't do to someone else what they'd done to me. The next morning I had a reply. Ms. Marchand, can you meet me privately? Do not contact anyone else. Bring documentation. Today. And just like that, the game changed. I arrived at the private members' library Clara had suggested. A quiet, wood-paneled place far from Meridian's glossy offices. She greeted me near the fireplace, dressed in muted gray and wearing the same unreadable expression I remembered from our project days. I read everything, she said without pleasantries. You've done more investigative work than half our compliance team. Maybe they weren't looking, I replied, taking a seat across from her. She nodded, then leaned forward. What's your goal here, Emery? Retribution? Your job back? No, I said. I want the fraud exposed. I want accountability. I want them to know they picked the wrong person to discard. Clara let out a breath. Good. Because this goes deeper than you know. Over the next hour we exchanged information. Clara had been suspicious of the Northbridge invoices for months but lacked access to the back-end approval chain. Once she matched my documents to her own audit notes, a full picture emerged. Mia Duval and the CFO had been funneling inflated payments through multiple shell vendors, masking them as consulting services. They used you as a smokescreen, Clara said. Laid off the one person who understood the system architecture, thinking no one would notice the gaps. I noticed, I said. She smiled faintly. I can take this to the board, but I'll need you to go on record. I hesitated for a breath, then nodded. Let's do it. Later that evening, I drove past Meridian's headquarters. The glass towers glistened under the city lights, cold and personal. I used to feel pride walking through those doors. Now I felt purpose. Back at my apartment, I began assembling everything. Secure backup logs, email correspondence, employee access trails. Every paper trail they thought had been buried. I documented everything like I'd been trained to, as if preparing for an audit that could change the future of the company. Then came the call I hadn't expected. Emery? A cautious voice on the other end said. It's Jonas. From IT. Jonas was one of the junior analysts I'd mentored. Fresh out of school, eager to please and too smart for his own good. I think something's going on, he whispered. They revoked access to half our tools today. No explanation. Mia's been in the server room twice. Alone. Alone? Mia doesn't have clearance for that, I said, sitting upright. She does now. Admin override. And something else, Jason Phillips was here. From Apex Consulting. You remember him? Of course I did. Jason was the contractor Daniel brought in 6 months before my layoff, the one who'd always ask too many vague questions. They're covering their tracks, I said. Jonas, listen carefully. Don't log anything on the internal system. If you find something, send it to me directly. He paused. You're not coming back, are you? Not the way they expect. That night I added a new line to my notebook. They think they've buried the truth. They forgot I built the foundation. The clock was ticking now. And I wasn't just reacting, I was preparing for checkmate. The next morning, I arrived early at a shared workspace I'd booked under a different name. Neutral ground. Quiet. Just me, my laptop, and a hot mug of black coffee. By now, I had over 200 documents, audio recordings from internal meetings, metadata from the outdated servers that Jonas discreetly exported. And best of all, proof that Jason Phillips hadn't just consulted. He'd written the shell company documentation himself. The metadata from one of the forged invoices still had his initials buried deep in the file history. I drafted an encrypted email and sent it to Clara, CCing only one other name. Robert Tierney, a board member who had once asked me during a town hall if I'd ever considered leadership. Let's see if he still remembers my name. By noon, Clara responded. Subject line. They're spooked. Message. Tierney wants to meet you. Discreetly. He asked, is she the one who used to keep the CIO in check? I said yes. That evening, I met Robert at a quiet Italian restaurant outside the city. He looked older than I remembered. Gray around the temples but sharp-eyed and calculating. Emery, he said as I Saturday. I've been reading about the Northbridge contracts all day. You've been busy. I had time, I said dryly. He chuckled once. The board suspected something, but no one had evidence. Your files change everything. And Jason, Mia, Daniel. They built the whole thing, I said, sliding over a summary packet. Over $3.8 million siphoned over 2 years through inflated consulting and software license fees. Some buried inside cloud migration costs. Most approved under Daniel's signature, countersigned by Mia. Robert's smile faded. And you? I'm not looking for my old job, but I am looking for structural change. I want someone watching the watchers. He nodded, thoughtful. Tomorrow morning we're holding an emergency board session. Clara will be there. Send me a digital copy of everything before 7 a.m., and I'll make sure it reaches everyone. I left with a single sentence echoing in my mind. Watching the watchers. That's what this had become. I wasn't just fighting to be heard. I was fighting for accountability in a system designed to forget the people who built it. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. At 7:02 a.m. sharp, I sent the files. By 9:13 a.m., Clara texted. Daniel's not here. Mia looks panicked. Jason's name just came up. They're stalling, but it's unraveling fast. At 9:47, a number I didn't recognize called. I answered. Ms. Reyes? The voice asked. This is Lorraine Marsh, Meridian's General Counsel. The board has reviewed your materials. We'd like to speak with you directly. Immediately. I didn't answer right away. I looked out the window at the skyline, my city, the one they tried to erase me from without a second thought. Tell them, I said. I'm listening. But this time it's on my terms. The silence on the line was long and deliberate. Then, understood. This wasn't the end. Not yet. But it was the moment they realized. I wasn't just the woman they fired. I was the storm they never saw coming. I met them at 11 a.m. sharp. They'd reserved a sleek glass-walled conference room at Meridian's downtown legal office. Clara was already inside, flanked by 2 board members and Lorraine Marsh, the general counsel who'd called me earlier. Daniel, Mia, and Jason were noticeably absent. Thank you for coming, Lorraine began. The board appreciates the thoroughness of your documentation. I sat down slowly, setting a printed binder of evidence on the table. What you received this morning was only the surface. There's more. Correspondence between Jason and external shell vendors, access logs showing Mia bypassing procurement channels, and Daniel personally approving payments 5 times higher than standard contract rates. Robert Tierney leaned forward. And your goal, Ms. Reyes? To see the system fixed, I replied calmly. You don't need to reinstate me. You need to rebuild trust. He exchanged glances with Clara, then Lorraine. And what would that look like? I took a breath, then outlined it clearly. Full transparency audit across the IT department and finance. Public board minutes on restructuring plans. Creation of an internal compliance division with independent reporting lines. and someone to run it who knows where the blind spots lie because she once got pushed into one. And you're offering yourself for that role? Lorraine asked. No, I said, locking eyes with her. I'm demanding it. Silence followed. Then Robert smiled, slow and genuine. I remember when you were just a systems analyst who stayed late for pizza during disaster recovery weekends. Looks like you've grown into something more. I nodded. Because I had to. We'll vote by end of day, Clara said. You'll have an answer by tonight. I left the meeting without another word. In my hand was a folder they'd handed me. Preliminary terms of the proposed role. Chief Integrity Officer, reporting directly to the board. Back at home I found Jonas waiting on my porch. He held out a flash drive. Final backup. Includes a few bonus items, like Jason's internal memo proposing your strategic exit 6 months before it happened. Turns out he used language from a template used in 2 other companies where layoffs conveniently aligned with embezzlement. I blinked. You're kidding. Jonas grinned. I don't joke about files. That night, just past 8 p.m., my phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Clara. Subject line. Approved. Unanimous. Message. Welcome back, Emery. You start Monday. I didn't smile. Not yet. There was still wreckage to clear. But I did stand taller. By the next morning, Meridian issued a carefully worded press release announcing leadership transitions, citing a renewed focus on ethical innovation. Internally, 3 executives were suspended. Jason Phillips had disappeared. His consultancy scrubbed from LinkedIn overnight. Mia and Daniel? They'd lawyered up. But it was too late. I was back. Not for revenge. For reform. And this time I had the keys. Monday morning I walked into Meridian's headquarters not as an employee, but as something entirely different. An agent of accountability. There were no welcome balloons, no staged photo ops. Just silence as I passed through the open floor of the IT department. Some looked away. Others watched openly. A few nodded, quiet gestures of solidarity. I didn't expect applause. What I brought with me wasn't comfort. It was disruption. Stephen met me outside the executive suite. You really did it, he whispered. Not yet, I said. But we're beginning. My new office was 3 doors down from Clara's. Corner view. Neutral decor. No trace of the previous occupant, whose name was already being erased from every internal system. I placed the drive Jonas gave me into a secure laptop and started reviewing the material. The template Jason had used was more than incriminating. It was damning. A pattern across 3 companies. Scripted exits. Inflated vendors. Same shell firms. Jonas had also pulled metadata from internal emails. Timestamps showing documents edited minutes before scheduled meetings. Daniel had known what was happening. Mia had helped execute it. They'd choreographed my termination like a Broadway show. Now they were watching it unravel in real time. At noon, I received an encrypted message from Robert Tierney. We've engaged a forensic audit firm. You'll be granted full access and discretion. Let us know if you encounter resistance. I leaned back in my chair. Resistance was inevitable. By Wednesday, I began assembling my own team, people who weren't afraid of silence, who asked too many questions. Jonas came on as cybersecurity lead. A junior analyst from HR who'd quietly flagged inconsistencies before being ignored was promoted to internal investigator. Even Stephen agreed to act as compliance liaison. His knowledge of the current system's social dynamics was invaluable. We didn't move loudly. We moved precisely. On Friday, we submitted our first formal request, access logs and financial correspondence related to all vendor contracts from the past 3 years. By noon, I received my first challenge, an email from Meridian's external counsel, questioning the scope of our audit. I replied with a single line. If you're worried about exposure, you're asking the right question. Saturday, I spent most of the day at home. I found myself watching the rain streak down the living room window, Scout curled at my feet, my second mug of coffee untouched. Andrea had messaged me earlier, asking how it felt to be back. I hadn't replied yet. It didn't feel like coming home. It felt like entering a battlefield I didn't start, but one I intended to finish. Sunday night, I drafted an internal memo, scheduled to be sent Monday at 7:59 a.m. Subject: Internal Audit Initiative. To all Meridian staff. Beginning this week, Meridian is launching a comprehensive ethics and operations review, led by the Office of Integrity. This isn't about fear, it's about truth. If you've ever stayed silent to keep your job, this is your chance to speak. Anonymity will be protected. Honesty will be honored. And for the first time in a long time, the right people will be listening. As I clicked schedule send, a single thought echoed in my mind. They built this house on sand. I'm here to lay the foundation in stone. Monday morning, my memo hit every inbox at Meridian. By 8:10 a.m., I had over 30 anonymous replies. Some offered documents, others stories. Most began the same way. I've been afraid to say this. The truths came pouring in. Someone in procurement had flagged duplicate invoices over a year ago. Ignored. A finance assistant had overheard Daniel and Jason discussing making space in the department. Even Clara had once raised concerns about vendor vetting and was told to stay in her lane. No one acted because no one thought anyone would listen. Now someone was. That afternoon, I met Robert Tierney in a glass-walled conference room. His face was drawn but alert. We've started termination proceedings for both Daniel and Jason, he said without hesitation. Clara resigned this morning. Mia's under internal investigation. I nodded. The money? I asked. We've frozen all payments to the shell vendors. Legal's preparing charges. There's more than enough for prosecution. And then he looked at me directly. We'd like you to stay. I knew this was coming. As Chief Integrity Officer or some new title they'd invent. With power. With status. With the very keys to a kingdom I once walked through invisible. But I didn't hesitate. No, I said. That's not what I came for.